Welcome to the extras for Rock and Roll Over. And I am sorry I went long on that previous one, Doc, and anybody who might be listening, but passion is passion. And that's how I felt with this record. And so this might be a much shorter extras because I covered a lot of the pieces I wanted to. But welcome. And Doc, can you forgive me for running long on that last one? I know we were watching that clock go at the end. So,
of course. And I'm already asking for forgiveness for Unplugged because
well,
it's
hey,
going to be an hour and a half.
That's a live album, and those ones are going to tend to get longer treatment anyway. So we'll look at it that way, right?
Awesome.
So here's
okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, I was just going to say. So one of the pieces I didn't cover with what we just recorded for Rock and Roll Over was how the band felt about Rock and Roll Over, and so ratings wise. I believe you said yours was a 7.3, which is still a very, very strong, healthy rating. And mine was an 8.3. So we obviously liked it. The band itself, let's see if Doc can guess. Who do you think rated it 3 stars of the 4 members? Who gave it a 3?
Ace.
Ace did not. Gene gave it the 3. So who do you think gave it the 5?
Peter.
Paul gave it the 5. So 3 from Gene, 5 from Paul, and both Peter and Ace gave it a 4. So
not
generally
bad.
speaking, they all generally like the album.
Yeah.
I think the issue for Gene with this one was he wanted to go more with what they were doing with Destroyer. The whole, he wanted to lock in Ezrin for a couple of records in a row. He said that on a couple of occasions. And just wanted to see where they could go with that. And in his estimation, getting in Eddie Kramer and doing more familiar type music was more to appease Ace and Peter. Here's the thing. It worked. So what does that tell you from a fan standpoint? I tend to align with the influences that Ace and Peter felt, which they've admitted too, is like Kiss should be a simple rock and roll sound. Because it's not necessarily about complexities. It's about what you're bringing and what how the chemistry works. And I couldn't agree more with that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there is beauty in simplicity sometimes. And I need to remind myself of that. Like I say, I listen to a lot of complex music and it does a lot for me. But sometimes slowing down and going, okay, things can be simple and great. And my dad told me that once, and he's like, you're listening to all this complex music, but what about like the Beatles, their early stuff? Please, please me. And I want to hold your hand and that kind of stuff. And he's like, what, why would you think that that's not good? Okay. So it's 3 chords, but that, a simple song can be a wonderful song. Sometimes I need a reminder.
Yeah. For sure.
And this album kind of did that for me, and Making Love specifically, because there's nothing super complex about that song. And
you should note that with the title. So
yeah. Well, a lot of the titles, Ladies Room and Making Love and Love 'Em and Leave 'Em, it's not going to be anything complex. But overall, this kind of had a weird U-shaped curve. Like I had said, started off really strong and sort of dipped in the middle for a few songs and then ended really strong with the last few songs. So, but overall, the 7.3 with only 110 on it is still pretty solid, because I gave a lot of 8s, a couple 9s, but there were a few 6s in there and there was a 5, and brought it down a little bit. But I think maybe it could be higher. Maybe if I re-listen to it and sort of, again, take into account some of your comments that you had made. And some of those I'm like, there's no way that's a 10. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of preference. And I think maybe, and you can tell me if this is true or not, but because you have a sort of a childhood, young adult emotional connection to it, like I do with Unplugged.
Yeah.
maybe that brought those up, or were you strictly trying to listen to this like the first time?
Here's the thing. I was trying both, and that's the thing. I'm not ashamed to admit that is like it's hard to take the nostalgia glasses off. And that's kind of why I corrected myself at the end of the review to say I know for sure that there's at least one more record. It's going to be a very surprising one. Kind of the face that you gave as I was giving my third 10 to songs that you just couldn't believe is probably the way you're going to react when we get to this album in particular down the road, that I think is going to rate surprisingly high right along this line too. But for this one, it's hard to take off those nostalgia glasses but the thing is though, I don't remember listening to it a lot as a kid. It was more as maybe I got, even 10 years after I'd been listening to Kiss, it was just something about this where the look of the sleeve. I love the four, the animated faces on there. It's colorful, even for those of us who are colorblind. I can see the variances and so it's about that experience, right? And so that's probably it. Where my current state was like if I bought Destroyer and I brought that home, it's like, wow, this is intense to the point like I don't want to say exhausting to listen to, but in some ways it is, because it's so different and heavy and full of new ideas and creativity, and that's great. But I don't always want to be exhausted. I have to be very which was a fun exercise listening to Destroyer, because I don't normally listen to it. I know most of the songs by heart, but going back and listening to and I realize, I'm unearthing stuff here. This is a tiring album. Rock and Roll Over is just fun. Like I feel like I would have been happy if I could have gone into a record store in the 70s, saw this sitting on there and like, yes, let's just bring this home. I don't have to think. I can put this on and there's no 5-10 minute songs on there, nothing that's going to lose my interest. By the time the song might be, it's already on to the next one. And the next one is just as fast and up tempo and fun as the previous one. So
yeah, it was surprising as I was listening to this. The album itself is like 32 and a half minutes.
It's like a Ramones album. So
yeah, it's very, and it could have been much shorter if they would have not done sort of the repetitive fade out pieces of it.
Yeah.
The songs are 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes long, maybe 3 minutes. So, if they didn't do those repetitive pieces, it might be a 25-minute album.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's quite short for 10 songs.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, anyway, solid overall. And jumping back to the album artwork, it's a very cool cover.
Yeah.
I had read that the same artist did the Sonic Boom cover.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that in several albums.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch more to cover before then.
Mm-hmm.
But it is cool artwork. I like the four faces and the sort of the symmetrical aspect of it, and what do they call that? Quadrimetrical?
Yeah, don't know.
Did I just make something up?
I think so.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's kind of broken into four pieces a little bit, and they're all sort of the same. And
yeah,
it's neat artwork. And it served as the stage for Unplugged. Literally the stage.
Oh, that's right.
The cover of this album.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, there must have been a big blanket type of thing, or maybe it was the backdrop for when they toured on this.
Yeah,
I mean, how cool would that be?
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen. Gosh, I'm trying to remember if Kissology has any of the concerts from this tour. I don't remember or not. I really don't, but. It would have been interesting to see if they incorporated that as part of their stage show or not. I mean, because I completely forgot that was projected on the floor. Is that what it was for? If I don't remember right, for Unplugged, wasn't it like a?
No, I want to say it was more like a carpet type of thing, or like a big sort of backdrop that would have
like
hung behind the stage
type thing.
Yeah, tapestry, real thick canvas type of thing that they had set down on the floor of the stage. Anyway, it just is a neat sort of, picture of the band, and it sort of feeds off that Destroyer album cover where it's a little more cartoony and character based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's neat. I like that,
and I think they kind of carry that over into Love Gun. I believe they've said that too. That like Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun are kind of like sister records. Like they kind of go with the same. And here's the thing. I was thinking about this earlier because I still stand by that. Like, it's such a power punch for me to get essentially my favorite Peter Criss song, followed up by essentially my favorite Gene Simmons song, followed up by essentially my favorite Paul Stanley song. And if only Ace could have moved Shock Me onto this record, which it would have fit. It really would have if he was strong enough to do. You would never have had a better album for me. That would have made it perfection. I was finally getting Ace in the limelight here, but alas, spoiler alert, we have to wait one more record before we get.
Well, he's maintaining that mysterious vibe, and so all three of them have these personalities, but he's this weird spacey guy that's over on the side just playing guitar and sticking to himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. I mean, that maybe was not on purpose, but it sort of established his character.
For sure. Yeah. And not really by design. It's just because he was just
that's who he was.
And, right. And it was like, I'm just owning my instrument and what I'm presenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked out for the best. And a lot of people were very influenced by him and his playing on this album was great.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really say too much about it.
Well, you did.
It fit really well.
That his solo in Making Love, until you said that, it didn't click on me. That is a very Tony Iommi guitar solo. I 100% know exactly what you're talking about, especially when you get into, well, I don't even want to say the 80s Iommi, because I mean, he used that a lot in his 80s, but even in the early Sabbath stuff, he was doing that same type of repetitive hammer-on type, and I don't know why I'm using the wrong terminology, but I know what you're talking about, that and very proud. It sounded a little different than what I'm accustomed to with Ace, but I dug it. It worked for that song.
Definitely worked for that song.
Do you know where Gene got the inspiration for Calling Dr. Love from?
Oh gosh, not that I can recall.
He wrote it, I believe, and I'd have to check the literature, the Behind the Mask or the Gene's book where he talks about it, but he wrote it, I believe, while they were on tour, and he was in a hotel room in Minnesota. So I always like to hang on to trivia there because we're from Minnesota, obviously. But specifically, while he was in the hotel room, he was watching The Three Stooges. And I grew up with The Three Stooges. My brother was so big into them, so we watched that a lot growing up. And specifically, there's an episode where they're veterinarians working in a vet hospital, and they're constantly getting paged from room to room over the old style loudspeakers. And in some Three Stooges shorts, they go by their names, which was, Mo Howard, Jerome Howard or Curly Howard, and then Larry Fine. So every 2 minutes, as I remember that episode, you get the paging with the, calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard. And it was just this little echoey thing. And they're constantly running to rooms. And I believe that's the episode that Gene was watching, because they use essentially the same audio effect in the paging in the song. That's basically the same type of sound that you get from that short from the Three Stooges. So there's your little, I don't know, useless trivia. Gene got Dr. Love inspiration from the Three Stooges.
Interesting.
In Minnesota.
Well, inspiration can come from anywhere, can't it?
Indubitably.
And you can mold it however you want. If you're inspired to do something, you can change it into whatever you want. So Three Stooges into a very definitive Gene song, defined his personality, or at least part of it.
The other side of it, yeah.
The other side of it.
Yeah.
That's very cool. You were talking that Peter had been working with Eddie Kramer on drums and drum sounds a lot during this.
Mm-hmm.
I briefly was buzzing through a few things online, and I had also seen that he was in a bathroom at one point.
Yeah.
Drumming. So what they did was they ran a video screen so he could see and sort of communicate with the other band while he was in the bathroom drumming.
Yeah.
And that's neat because as a producer or a engineer for an album, you try anything. Mm-hmm. And as a listener, you don't necessarily hear those differences unless you're really in tune to that kind of stuff. So there were I want to say John Bonham, when he did the super heavy intro to When the Levee
Heavy
Breaks.
breaks. Yeah.
He was in this gigantic entryway to this mansion that they were
Yeah.
recording at.
Mhm.
And so to get certain sounds, you use different
Natural,
kits and
yeah.
you put them in different situations. And a lot of people record vocals in bathrooms and just run cables all the way down to the studio, and
Mm-hmm.
they try whatever they need to try to make it sound good or sound the way they want it to.
Mm-hmm.
And to get thundering drums, maybe you need a little bit of natural reverb rather than putting it on the board.
Yeah.
And just briefly jumping back to the first album at the end of Black Diamond, I was reading, not that they were hitting chords over and over and over, which they were, but rather than slowing them down and dropping the key, they were actually slowing the tape down.
Oh, see, that's what I kind of assumed. I wasn't sure.
So that's what happened when I covered it, when I was
Mhm.
playing it
On
for
your
my recording on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would drop it, but they would drop it like a quarter step. So if you watch that video of me playing it, it just kind of dropped. I drop it a half step and it doesn't quite sound right. So I sort of, just
You fib it and
fib it a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so all these production tricks are pretty cool. So elevator shaft, bathroom, massive room with foam on the walls. You do whatever it takes to make it sound the way you want it to sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming we're going to come across a whole bunch more of that interesting stuff as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're talking Love Gun, which is also one of, if you're a Kiss fan, generally one of your favorite albums. Not you specifically, but Kiss fans specifically, most of the time point to Destroyer, point to Love Gun, point to Alive.
Unless you're an Australian, they point to Dynasty. So.
Dynasty. Yes. So I guess I would call it somewhat of a landmark album.
Yeah.
So excited to do that. That's another one okay, so now we're getting to the point where I've not listened to these in their entirety ever.
Ooh, fun.
So now we're getting to songs that I've never heard. Because you obviously have probably heard every Kiss song ever, I would imagine.
Commercially released, yeah, I would say for sure. But there's some big gaps in there just because I've heard it, especially, I'm not gonna lie, even though I hold a very special place in my heart for 80s Kiss for different reasons, there's the nostalgia glasses for there, because I am planning on listening to these as if I'm trying to experience buying them. And we're gonna have some low rated stuff. We just are. I just know it because I know. And then there's some that I'll look at the album or the title of the track, and I don't know. I know there's some gems that are buried in the 80s that are some really, really good tunes that I look forward to hearing again. But there's a lot of songs in there that it's gonna be hard to get through 4 minutes.
Yeah, I'm excited. And
I am too.
One more thing before we end this for the day. I was just reading the reviews, sort of general reviews for Rock and Roll Over. And generally speaking, it was received really well by critics. There was a couple that had shredded it apart a little bit and whatnot, but generally it did quite well. It didn't jump up the charts massively. There was a couple of places where it was as high as 10, 11, something like that, but generally in the 20s and 30s around the world. So not massive success, but not bad by any means. And that's kind of where I rated it, was not bad by any means, but not a massively good album. So you, Mr. 10, are not on your own, but you're not in the majority.
Yeah, it's part of that. It's interesting when you think about critical reception on that, though, is had they not released, had Beth on Destroyer not received the critical acclaim that it did, do you think critics would have even given this one a second thought? Did they go in it with a little more rose-colored glasses because these guys actually can write decent music? Because that's what happened. Is Destroyer came out and initially it didn't do what they were anticipating. It wasn't until radio play and the word of mouth got out with Beth, and then critics started to change their tune, as it were. So does that factor into their next release? Like critics are open, a little more open. I don't know. I don't know what that's like, but all I know is, again, when I think of classic Kiss and I need a record of theirs to put on, I'm going to go to Rock and Roll Over every time. But there are a few others in there. So
Yeah. And speaking of that, I guess so far, and we're what, 6 albums in or something? 6?
I have to
6.
count them. I don't, yeah.
I would probably, I don't know if it's my highest rated, but I think I'd jump to Destroyer if I just needed something to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that or the first album, and then skip through all the weird stuff,
Sure.
corny stuff.
I'll tell you what, when we hit the 80s, you're going to start looking back at these with a different type of fondness, I promise you. So
Yeah, well, I'm excited to sort of, and it's weird to say, but I'm kind of ready to move on to different members.
Yeah.
I'm ready to sort of see what the future brings. I know that Love Gun is kind of basically their final album with all of the 4 players playing all their instruments and doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then Dynasty, and what's the next one? Is it Creatures or Unmasked?
No, Unmasked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh,
So that's
a
where
good
things start to change a bit.
Yeah.
So
Not
we're
necessarily
getting-
for the worse.
No.
Yep.
And we're just getting near some changes here, and maybe it's time for that, because some of these have seemed, I don't want to say stale.
No, but
But-
there's by design, they're especially with this one, they're going back to familiar sounds. So it's kind of like listening to an extension of the first album, kind of like an extension of Dress to Kill, right? We've been there, we've covered that. So
Yep.
Love Gun, I think, is going to be a little bit of the same too, but then things take a sharp turn. So
It'll be interesting, and I will just mention real quick that Love Gun, the song, is probably on my top 5 Kiss songs.
ooh,
So it will be interesting to listen to the whole album, because
yeah,
the song itself, I love it.
good deal.
So
dude.
I'll
All right.
I'll end with that, and I don't want to spoil too much more, but we'll do that one relatively soon
Mhm.
and go from there.
Excellent. Thanks for tuning in, listening to the Kiss Extras for Rock and Roll Over. We will see you next time.
Yeah, we need to come up with a dad joke. What do you got?
I got nothing, man. I got you. I had such a great close there too. My voice was the perfect baritone.
No, I'm going to wreck it for you.
All right, thank you.
I'm looking through my notes here. We will see you in your dreams.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's nice and mellow. Now do your radio voice and
I
say.
can't now. Now we're just going to be awkwardly bantering and just cut the feed.
All right, we're cutting the feed. Catch you all later.
Thanks.